Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here with another edition of the Lower Decks Deep Dive, where I take a look at the Easter eggs, canon connections, and continuity bits from the latest episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. This week was a little lighter on the Easter eggs, but what was there was a lot of fun, and there's some interesting references to some classic characters as well. So let's go ahead and dive right into this deep dive and see what we found. In the cold open of this episode, we see that it is apparently open mic night on the Cerritos, featuring a concert by Boimler and then later by Tendi and Mariner. Apparently concerts are as big a thing on the Cerritos as they were on the Enterprise D. There were so many concerts during the 7-year run of The Next Generation. Boimler's instrument of choice seems to be a violin, much like Lieutenant Commander Data on TNG. However, Boimler's playing style is a little more animated. Also during this opening, we see a Klingon bird of prey whose captain is currently speaking with the captain of the Cerritos. This bird of prey looks fairly similar to the venerable Klingon bird of prey design first seen in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock and on through the original series films and the TNG DS9 era. Coming back from the opening credits, we see the USS Cerritos at warp, and in this instance, it appears to be even closer to the classic TNG warp effect that we've seen in Star Trek: The Next Generation and subsequent series. Completely absent are the blue glowy bits that we see from Discovery's warp drive, Picard's warp drive, and even the little hint of them that we saw earlier in Lower Decks. Via the First Officer's log, we learn that the Cerritos is en route to Cardassia Prime in an aborted mission to negotiate some sort of treaty there. Cardassia Prime is of course the homeworld of the Cardassians. This race was first seen in Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine visited Cardassia Prime on numerous occasions. It was last seen in the Deep Space Nine series finale, What You Leave Behind. Cardassia Prime had been brutally attacked by the Dominion and left in a shambles. We've seen Cardassia Prime subsequently in novels. These are, of course, non-canon, most notably by author Una McCormack. Early in this episode, we learn about the concept of buffer time, a period of time in which the Lower Decks crew members kind of kick back and relax. They pad their repair or work estimates in order to give themselves a little bit of extra free time. This would seem to be based on Scotty's policy of padding his repair estimates in order to be known as a miracle worker. This was first mentioned in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. He also talks to Geordi in the TNG episode Relics about this policy of his. I like this scene in which the captain chastises a couple of lieutenants for meandering the hallways, not looking particularly busy. I always kind of wanted a scene in Star Trek: The Next Generation where Picard would pass some crew members who were kind of sauntering down the hallway, and the crew members, noticing Picard, would suddenly decide to look busy. Ensign Boimler, while taking the turbolift to his destination, begins humming a very familiar theme song. It seems that the theme from Star Trek: The Next Generation is a canon piece of music within the Star Trek universe. This is not the first time that a character in a science fiction show has been humming or singing the theme tune to a show in their universe. We've seen Samantha Carter humming the theme to Stargate SG-1 while starring on that same show. Giving the captain a rundown of the duties he's completed, Boimler mentions performing a baryon sweep on the Cerritos' warp nacelles. The baryon sweep was first seen in the 6th season Star Trek: The Next Generation episode Starship Mine. The process, which is lethal to organic matter, is performed in a dry dock if the entire ship is undergoing the baryon sweep. However, if it is just the warp nacelles, it seems that an evacuation of the ship is not necessary. This episode lets us get to know the first officer of the Cerritos, Commander Ransom, a little better. Several times in this episode, he would appear to be striking a Riker pose. Those of you who are familiar with TNG will know this as Riker's signature move, wherein he props his leg up on a console or a rock or whatever happens to be nearby. Ransom, as I said, does this several times in the episode. We have yet to see him mount a chair quite like Riker does, but I'm expecting that we might see that at some point in this season. In his first scene in the episode, Ransom makes a number of references that can be linked to past episodes of Star Trek. He talks about horned gorillas, which may be a reference to the Mugatu from the TOS episode A Private Little War. He also talks about sentient tar, which would seem to be a reference to Armus, the malevolent creature that killed Tasha Yar in the TNG episode Skin of Evil. Finally, he talks about spores that make you hook up with your best friend's sister, something with which he has had personal experience apparently. While that particular situation did not happen in the episode, these may be similar to the spores seen in This Side of Paradise. In that episode, Spock experienced romantic love apparently for the first time under the influence of the spores. Mariner, who has joined Ransom on an away mission, makes several references to classic Star Trek. The away team comes under attack by spear-wielding Galrakians. Mariner says that nobody is dying from a spear wound because they live on a spaceship. Spears were a frequent weapon seen in Star Trek the original series especially, and they seem to be much more dangerous than you would think to someone with access to 23rd century medicine. Mariner makes direct reference to the original series when surrounded by the Galrakians with spears, saying, "What am I, Kirk? Is this the 2260s?" Clearly referencing the original series of Star Trek and the outlandish situations that Kirk and his crew would find themselves in that show. When the Galrakians invade the Cerritos, Captain Freeman makes a shipwide announcement telling the crew to repel boarders, but to make sure that they also complete their assigned tasks as well. At one point she says, "It's called multitasking. They do it on the Enterprise all the time." The Enterprise that she is referring to would be the one that is currently in service at the time this series is set, namely the USS Enterprise NCC 1701E, seen in the 4 TNG feature films. At one point, Ensign Mariner shows Commander Ransom the scars she's acquired. She mentions getting them on Magus 3, Nanibia Prime, and Scottsdale. Of these 3, only one has been previously mentioned in Star Trek. Magus 3 is apparently the planet upon which Guinan acquired her rather powerful energy weapon that she uses in the TNG episode Night Terrors, whereas Scottsdale, I'm told by people from the region, is indeed a rough place. It would seem that Riker is not the only officer that Ransom emulates. As he prepares to fight, he rips off his shirt, reminiscent of one Captain James T. Kirk from Star Trek the original series. Similarly, his fighting style seems very familiar, especially for one who might have watched the original series. The interlocked hand clubbing is a mainstay of Kirk's fighting style, as well as a number of other Starfleet officers over the years. In fact, at one point while using it, he yells "double fist punch," and alternates between saying Kirk Spock when hitting the very fearsome Vindor. Additionally, the background music to this scene is somewhat reminiscent of the iconic fight music from Star Trek the original series. This is not so much an Easter egg, but rather a great line from the security chief, Lieutenant Shax, who yells at Boimler that if he's planning to inspire some sort of resolution, then inspire it now, as the Galrakians are attempting to storm the bridge and all hope appears to be lost. This is one that requires a bit of a freeze frame. At the end, when Ransom orders Ensign Mariner to be taken into custody, she kicks over a table of medical instruments. If you pause here, these two in particular look very familiar. This one we've seen many times in Star Trek The Next Generation, and this one here would appear to be the medical device that the Doctor from Voyager mistook for a thrombic modulator when he was aboard the USS Prometheus in the Voyager episode Message in a Bottle. In the final scene of the episode, we fast forward to the far future, where we see a class learning about Brad Boimler, described as the laziest, most corner-cutting Starfleet officer in history, seen here with a Great Bird of the Galaxy. The Great Bird of the Galaxy is a term used to refer to Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry. It apparently originated in a memo between him and producer Bob Justman during the run of the original series. Reference was made in dialogue to the Great Bird of the Galaxy by Sulu in the episode The Man Trap. And for a truly outlandish explanation of exactly what the Great Bird of the Galaxy is, read the first 4 books of Peter David's Star Trek New Frontier series. And remember, it's non-canon. And in the final joke of the episode, my favorite reference so far over the course of the series, we learn that Chief Miles Edward O'Brien is considered to be one of the most important people in all of Starfleet history, perhaps the most important person. Interestingly, the hologram they show of him is him as the transporter operator on the Enterprise D, and not in his later role as Chief of Operations of Deep Space Nine, which would seem to be the more important posting. I speculated in the Positively Trek podcast if this might be a roundabout reference to the webcomic Chief O'Brien at Work. In that webcomic, of course, we learned that Deep Space Nine was simply the imaginings of a bored at work O'Brien who imagined himself in a more important position. However, it does appear that history will be kind to him, as history regards him as incredibly important. Well, there you have it, folks. That's what I found this week. I did also want to list all of the aliens that we see on the ship. There was one in particular that I think may be an Akamarian, but other than that, nothing really new in that arena. I could be wrong about this one, but there's so many different bumpy four-headed races that it's hard to tell, but I think that might be what this character is. Well, were there any that you found that I neglected to list here? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, of course, as always, to the Patreon supporters for their help in bringing these videos to you. I really do appreciate it. Everyone else, thank you so much for watching. And, if you felt this video was worth it, a like, share, and a subscribe would really go a long way. Thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.